The Calumet and Hecla C&H Mining Company formed from a merger between the Calumet Company and the Hecla Company in May 1871. By the late 1890s, Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula became one of the major producers of the world's copper supply, with C&H-owned mines leading production. Of the 16,000 men employed in Michigan's copper mines in 1913, 4,208 of them worked for the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company. Many of the workers the company employed were non-English speaking, first-generation immigrants, Italian, Cornish, and Finns to name a few. The company quickly controlled the surrounding area of Calumet, then known as Red Jacket. The company constructed housing and recreational buildings for its workers, and provided fuel such as coal and electricity for the town. According to one labor leader, the mining company eventually controlled the 2 newspapers and censored every article affecting the mines. During the Copper Country Strike of 1913 through 1914, all C&H mines were affected as the workers went on strike for better wages, hours, and working conditions. However, the attempts of unionizing the mines during this period was unsuccessful. Following the decline of copper mining, many of the workers left the Upper Peninsula, and C&H mines have been vacant since 1970.
Copper mining was a dangerous job. Its many risks included rock falls, electrocution, falling down a 1,000-foot mine shaft, being blown up, breathing carbon monoxide, burning inside the mine, and being run over by machinery. It was a matter of course that 1 man died each week inside the mines. Indeed, in 1911, there were 60 deaths, more than 1 death a week, 656 serious injuries, and 3,974 slight injuries in copper country mines. Yet the copper miners in Calumet were paid only $2.50 each day for a workday of 10 or 11 hours. In 1913, the 1-man drill was introduced. This drill would reduce the number of men needed in the mines, potentially putting some out of a job, and the miners perceived it as more dangerous because there wasn't a second man watching their back. It was these conditions that led up to the strike. By 1913, the Calumet and Hecla, Portland, and Scott mining companies had consolidated into one. This mine had 96 levels, 16 incline shafts, and 1 vertical shaft, the Red Jacket shaft. Copper mines in the Upper Peninsula generally found 3 types of copper: float copper, which was scraped from the Earth's surface by glaciers; mass copper, which was found in immense globs; and copper rock, which was copper trapped inside conglomerate or amygdaloidal rock. While copper rock cost millions of dollars of capital to be mined and processed, this was the copper that made the copper country mines such a successful venture. The Calumet and Hecla mine shafts, including the Red Jacket shaft, were built in pursuit of copper rock.
Mining accidents, low pay, and a new dangerous 1-man drill led to a spike in Western Federation of Miners membership in the spring of 1913. The National Union was planning a strike for 1914, but the Union locals did not want to wait that long. In early July 1913, the 5 locals in the copper country voted to ask the companies for an 8-hour workday, higher wages, and safer conditions. When the company refused, they went on strike. While most strike parades were peaceful, there was also some violence, and the Michigan National Guard was called to Calumet in late July. This photograph shows the National Guard encampment near the armory in Calumet. Strike parades were held almost daily throughout the summer and into the fall. This photograph depicts the strike parade in Calumet on July 27, 1913. Many of the strike parades were led by Big Annie Klobuchar Clement, who was over 6 feet tall, carrying a large American flag. She was the leader in the local Western Federation of Miners Women's Auxiliary. The image on the left shows a headshot of Big Annie with her flag. On the right, she leads a strike parade near the Calumet and Hecla Hospital on Calumet Avenue. The strike also attracted National Western Federation of Miner leaders like Guy Miller and National Labor leaders like Mother Jones. They attended a strike parade in Calumet on August 10, 1913. So I can't show you the exact route of any of the strike parades because I was unable to determine them, but I can show you the general route of one of them. So we are looking at the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is this bit of the UP, and Calumet, which is up here, is where, of course, eventually the Italian Hall disaster would happen. But there were strike parades going on all over the Keweenaw Peninsula. All of this is a major copper mining area. And the one that I'm going to point out happened on August 2nd, 1913. And it started down at the Quincy Mine, which is about 12 miles south of Calumet. The parade began there. Quincy Mine wasn't operated by Calumet and Hecla, which was one of the other major mining companies that the strikes were happening against. Today, the Quincy Mine is a museum. You can go on tours and go down actually into the mining shaft. But the march went south into Houghton, which is about 3 miles away, and then they went back up north across the river into Hancock, where they concluded at Quetzalcoatl Hall, which is a Finnish fellowship organization in Hancock. But unfortunately, I could not determine the exact location of the hall, and in fact, the only references I could find to it were in a few newspaper articles around the time of the strike, so apparently it wasn't very long-lived.
As the strike dragged on, the conflict escalated into violence. The mining company brought in strikebreakers, among them the Waddell Mahan Detective Agency. These men were considered little more than gun thugs. When other efforts to deter the striking miners failed, the Waddell Mahan men turned to violence. In one of the most brutal acts of the strike, 6 men, including 4 Waddell Mahan men, attacked Croatian Joseph Putrick's boarding house. They drove the men in the courtyard into the boarding house and then shot through the windows. 2 striking miners were killed, and 2 more were injured. An infant who was in a woman's arms was also injured.
As the strike continued into the winter, Big Annie and other members of the Western Federation of Miners Women's Auxiliary planned a Christmas party to cheer up the strikers' children. They held the party at Italian Hall, a community gathering space in Calumet that housed a mutual aid society for Italian Americans, as well as a tea company and a saloon. This photo depicts the exterior of Italian Hall. It was taken many years after, but it was the only photo I could find with a side view of the building to give you a sense of how large it was. Despite the relatively small size of the second floor where the party was taking place, 500 to 700 people came. When an unknown person falsely exclaimed that there was a fire, the crowd rushed to the narrow stairway. The door at the bottom of the stairs would not open, causing a pile-up on the stairs. 63 children and 10 adults died in the stampede. Eyewitness accounts of the event varied greatly. Some people remembered that the doors opened outward, suggesting that there must have been someone barring the doors from the outside to prevent escape. Others believed that the doors opened inward and simply could not be opened due to the pile-up of people against them. A few people said that they saw an anti-strike button on the lapel of the man who yelled fire, but others said that they saw no such pin. The man who yelled fire was never identified. This photo depicts the interior of Italian Hall the day after the disaster. And this photo depicts the outside of Italian Hall the day after the disaster. In the years after the disaster, Italian Hall understandably sat empty as no one wished to use it. By 1980, the building had fallen into such disrepair that it was condemned. A group attempted to raise money to fix it, but they failed to save it. As you can see, only the famous arch at the bottom of the deadly stairs still stands today. There is a small memorial park with a historical marker and a small memorial stone for the victims.
The night of the tragedy, the bodies of the dead were brought to a makeshift morgue in Red Jacket Town Hall for identification. An inquest was called, and the members of the 6-person jury were sworn in that same night at Town Hall, although the trial would not begin until days later. On December 26th, Houghton County Coroner William F. Fisher issued multiple death certificates for the dead, stating their cause of death as killed December 24, 1913, at Calumet, Michigan, in a jam caused by a false cry of fire by someone at present unknown. The jury met between December 29th and the 31st at Town Hall, where they took testimonies from witnesses. However, testimony was taken from those who could speak English, as the inquest had no qualified translators. This left many witnesses unable to give statements. After 3 days, the jury of men were unable to find the person who yelled fire. Due to the tragedy's union and strike ties, the United States Congress called for a subcommittee to investigate the Italian Hall disaster on February 11, 1914. Despite the multiple investigations, the perpetrator was never found.
The churches. After caskets were shipped to Red Jacket, the funeral rites were held in 6 churches on Sunday, December 28th, culminated in a gigantic funeral procession from Red Jacket to the cemetery. In the morning of the 28th, bodies were transferred from homes to the churches, and all of the funerals started simultaneously. Let's take a look at the churches where the funerals were held. Here's the former site of the Bethlehem Finnish Church of Helka. It's located on Agent Street. And you can see here that the National Park Service superimposed the image of the church that burned in 1930 on the current site today. Here's an image from the early 1900s. St. Mary's is on Portland Street, north and west. The church exists today. You can see a street view over to your right. And here's a similar street view from the early 1900s. Here's St. Mary's in the snow. St. Mary's Italian Church. St. Joseph's Slovenian Catholic Church looks very similar today as it did back in the early 1900s when it was first built. It's now called St. Paul's Episcopal Catholic Church. Here's an image of the reverend who led the funeral rites. And here's another image of St. Joseph's. Just a block away on Elm and 8th is the Finnish National Church, which today is the National Lutheran Church. Over on 7th is St. John's Croatian Church. It's on 7th between Oak and Elm. You can see an image there. Here the National Park Service superimposed the image from the 1900s because it had burned down. And there you see the image on a postcard. The Finnish Lutheran Church is now Habitat for Humanity Restore. You can see it's functional. And here you can see the image from 1913 with the procession beginning as the caskets are being laid to rest at Lakeview. Lakeview was a minimum of 2 miles away. You remember many people walked to Lakeview. Caskets were carried in hearse or by pallbearers. We'll go into that more in a minute. As aforementioned, all funerals started at 1 p.m. on Sunday, December 28, 1913. The Finnish church on Pine Street actually buried 28 members from the tragedy. Here you can see 10 caskets and many people in attendance at the funeral rites. The following picture, you can also see an image of caskets near the altar. According to the Calumet News, there was a coordinated effort for all funerals to begin at 1 p.m. and at 2 p.m. the funeral procession began with all people leaving their respective churches and beginning to walk to the Lakeview Cemetery, which was at least 2 miles away. Here you can see how Oak Street looks from 6th Avenue in Calumet today and in around 1910 how it looked. The following slide will show you the procession in the same location. You can see the steeples and the similar buildings. The funeral procession also occurred on 6th Avenue, walking north. And here you can see the funeral procession on the right, people walking past Town Hall north towards Lakeview Cemetery. The Google map shows how the location looks today. The gigantic procession from Red Jacket to Lakeview Cemetery lined the streets throughout the town. According to the Calumet Times, 16 hearses were secured to hold the caskets of the adult victims, and 50 carriages were secured for the closest families of the victims. At times during the procession, you can see that they were 4 people deep, and they went for miles and miles. 100 mine strikers walked from Calumet to the Lakeview Cemetery to dig graves, where all but 4 bodies were buried on Sunday afternoon. According to the Calumet News, on December 27, 1913, preparations have been made for a demonstration of sympathy, the like of which has never been held in the Upper Peninsula. In fact, special trains for members of the miners' unions left on the evening of December 27th to ensure that miners and strikers could arrive in time for the funerals. In the cemetery, bodies of Protestants and Catholics were interned in the appropriate portions of the cemetery, but not together. The gigantic procession ended at Lakeview Cemetery with the mourners joining in the burials. Many of the burials, as you saw, were in trenched graves. And after, both religious leaders as well as union leaders spoke, building momentum for their cause over this tremendous tragedy. Eulogies were given in Croatian, Finnish, and English. In addition, Lakeview became a location to activate change, pulling on people's strong emotions of grave loss.